I just want to welcome everybody to NumismaTalks. Every second and fourth Thursday of the month at noon Mountain, we will be here with a new presentation. We are happy to be back after our busy summer seminar month of June. During this presentation, you may come up with questions. If you do, please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen that many of you have already gotten to use to send in your questions, as all of you are muted on this presentation. Your question will be addressed at the end of the presentation by Doug. Now, I would like to introduce you to today's presenter, Doug Mudd. Douglas Mudd is the Curator Director of the American Numismatic Association's Money Museum in Colorado Springs. He's responsible for developing, planning, and content of the museum's exhibition program and the organization and care of the ANA collections. He has created dozens of numismatic exhibits for the museum and for the ANA's semi-annual convention. His recent work has expanded the museum's exhibits into the virtual world. Doug will be presenting Politics, Ego, and Tragedy, a bold tale of political intrigue. And Doug, it's all yours.
Thank you, Paula. So today we're going to be talking about some political situations that occurred just over 2,000 years ago in ancient Rome. So we're going to be using coins to illustrate this story. And with that, I'll start. Money has had many uses over the ages beyond its original development for purposes of long-distance trade and military power. Among them is the use of money as a means of communication through designs and legends. A nation's money is often the first impression a visitor gets of the nature of a country. As such, the designs and legends placed on money have always been considered important by the authorities responsible for their issue. What follows is a cautionary tale of the dangers of political faction in the setting of the Roman Republic, as illustrated by a series of coins that were created before and during the civil wars of 49 to 31 BC. The fight between the Caesarians and Republicans set the Republic into its final death throes, only ending with the emergence of Octavian Caesar, now known as Augustus Caesar, as the sole ruler of the Roman world. The coins express their origins, loyalties, and political agendas of the primary leaders in these wars. But first, we'll get our setting so that people can place themselves geographically. Here we have a map illustrating the Roman Empire as it was during the last years of the Republic, as the series of civil wars between Caesar and the Republicans, including Pompey the Great, Brutus, Cassius, Cato, and other great names of the period. The wars began as the first triumvirate, Pompey, Caesar, and Crassus, broke up in the wake of Crassus's death in battle at the Battle of Carrhae versus the Parthians in 53 BC. Hostilities began between Caesar and Pompey, famously when Caesar crossed the Rubicon River into Italy in 49 BC. The first round of battles ended in the plains outside Munda in Spain in 45 BC, when the last followers of Pompey were defeated. Caesar was able to return to Rome and become dictator. He was the first man in Rome with all of the power until a certain assassination. What follows is a story as told by the coinage. So the Roman Republic gained its independence from the Etruscan kings in 509 BC. Among the leaders of this movement was Lucius Junius Brutus, first consul and forebearer of Marcus Junius Brutus, who was a leader of the conspiracy against Gaius Julius Caesar. The ideals of the Republic included that no individual should be more important than the state, and that the people, as represented by the Roman Senate, were sovereign, not any individual. Ideals which became a model for all future republics and represented the world in which the Roman Republic was created, a world which was ruled by kings, where on coinage, for example, you would have the images of the kings, and they represented the ultimate power. They actually owned the country that they were in charge of and owned the money. This coin is typical of the early series of Roman Republican denarii, a head of Roma with a mark for denomination, the name of the city, and images of the Dioscuri on the reverse, all images evoking Roman beliefs and patriotism without placing individuals above anyone else, but celebrating the Roman Republic. This coinage stood out at the time it was issued because most coins featured the head of a king. The next coin to begin the story with is that it illustrates the gradual changes in the coinage of the later Republic. The standard imagery of the Republic was replaced by references to the great heroes of the early Republic, but with a twist. The heroes referenced were the ancestors for the moneyers responsible for the designs, thus becoming a form of political self-promotion. It turns out that the job of being a triumviri monetalis, which there were 3 moneyers that were responsible for the issuance of coins each year, that job was a beginning step for a Roman political career. So if you could identify your illustrious forebears and associate them with yourself, that would help you at the polls and in order to go to the next steps. This coin of Marcus Junius Brutus, struck during his term as moneyer in 54 BC, refers to his ancestry, which included L. Junius Brutus, the semi-legendary first consul of the Roman Republic, who overthrew Tarquinius Superbus, the last Etruscan king of Rome in 509 BC, and on the reverse, C. Servilius Ahala, who slew the tyrant Spurius Maelius in 439 BC. Celebrating his connection to the tyrannicide, Ahala proved prophetic 10 years later when, because of his ancestry and reputation for integrity, Brutus was recruited by conspirators against Julius Caesar and became a leader of the assassins. Brutus issued this coin to celebrate liberty. It has a personification of liberty on the obverse and a classic Roman Republican image of a senator escorted by his lictors, who were a combination of bodyguard and ceremonial escort assigned to senators. Despite his hatred of Pompey, Brutus joined with Pompey in the civil war of 49 BC against Caesar. After Pompey's defeat at Pharsalus in 48 BC, he was pardoned by Caesar, who had an ongoing affair with Brutus's mother, according to some historians. Caesar appointed Brutus governor of Gaul in 46 BC and praetor in 44 BC. Brutus repaid the favor through treachery to Caesar, but with loyalty to his ancestry and his inherited principles. Coins such as this maybe could have warned Caesar, if he'd paid attention, that Brutus was not necessarily going to support his bid for dictatorship. Here's an example of the elephant coinage of Caesar, struck around the time he crossed the Rubicon into Italy in January 49. This was used to pay Caesar's forces during the civil war with Pompey. The Roman world would be shaken and transformed by a civil war over the next decade. Since large quantities of denarii were necessary to pay military expenses, the mints traveled with the armies as they fought. This issue was ordered not by a moneyer, as was usual under the Republican system, but by Julius Caesar himself as general. Die evidence suggests that over 7 million of these coins were struck. The obverse depicts the triumph of good over evil, numismatic propaganda designed to encourage Caesar's soldiers during the long, intense campaign. The reverse depicts the priestly emblems of Caesar's office as Pontifex Maximus. In all likelihood, this type was used by Caesar's military forces at least until the decisive battle of Pharsalus in August of 48 BC. Now, here's one of my favorite coins of the period. An interesting piece because of the subject matter. The obverse portrait on this coin has sometimes been identified as the famous chief of the Arverni, Vercingetorix, whom Julius Caesar captured in 52 BC at the siege of Alesia. Roman generals were permitted to celebrate their victories in triumphal parades in Rome, in which they displayed their captive opponents, sometimes years after their victory. Roman generals wanted the greatest spectacle possible at their triumphs, and part of this was to ensure their defeated enemies looked formidable. It was no good to show a half-starved and beaten skeleton of a warrior. So they were kept in healthy and well-fed conditions in preparation for the triumphal parade, in which they were forced to walk in chains in their national costume before being executed. In this case, Caesar displays the portrait of his fiercest Gallic enemy, a politically astute move since Vercingetorix had been made famous by Caesar's popular book on the conquest of Gaul. Some authorities believe this identification is unlikely, but the large, distinctive, and carefully modeled head with a very detailed portrait, rather than a stylized personification of a Gaul, of just a generic Gaul, strongly suggests the die cutter worked with a live model. The reverse is interesting because it depicts a distinctively Gallic chariot, where the warriors are depicted nude, and you have the driver on the actual yoke, while the warrior is standing in the back with his shield and spear. So here we start the actual coinage reflecting the war. This is a coin of the Caesarians. Aulus Hirtius, praetor at the time this coin was struck, was a close friend of both Cicero and Caesar, and had served as the latter's legate in Gaul. He was a consul in 43 BC, having been nominated by Caesar, and was sent along with Octavian and Pansa against Antony, who was besieging Decimus Brutus at Mutina. Hirtius defeated Antony, but fell while leading the assault on his camp. Hirtius is credited with completing Caesar's commentaries on the Gallic, Alexandrian, African, and Spanish wars, which were part of Caesar's famous book. Here's a coin of the Republicans. So Scipio was Pompey's colleague in the consulship of 52 BC and governor of Syria in 49 BC. He commanded the center of the Pompeian line at Pharsalus, after which after the battle, he fled to Africa and formed an alliance with Juba, king of Numidia. Through the influence of Cato, he obtained control of the Pompeian forces and was attacked by Caesar and defeated in 46 BC at Thapsus in North Africa, where, not wanting to be captured, he committed suicide. This coin was struck during Scipio's African campaign, another example of an opponent of Caesar breaking tradition by using his own name on his coinage. Here's a coin that's interesting for its political imagery. First, it's showing a defeat, the victory of Caesar over the Gauls, and you have a trophy at the center with Gallic arms and weapons, including the famous carnix, the trumpet that the Gauls used, and a Gallic warrior and female kneeling below. But the image on the obverse celebrates the Julian clan from which Caesar was descended. It traced its lineage back to Venus. The goddess's tryst with Anchises resulted in the birth of the hero Aeneas, who fled from Troy, who in turn had a son, Ascanius, also known as Julius, who was the eponym of the Julian clan. Caesar's association with Venus and with figures closely associated with the founding of Rome served as a principal theme in his political marketing. One of the criticisms made of Julius Caesar was his use of coins to promote his own accomplishments. It was okay to celebrate your ancestors and their accomplishments, but not living persons, and certainly not yourself. Julius Caesar, excuse me, sorry about my speech today. Julius Caesar finally broke with the Republican traditions in 44 BC, placing his own image on coins as the Dictator-for-Life. There were even rumors that he wanted to be crowned king, as it had been prophesied that the Parthians, whom Caesar was about to invade in retaliation for their defeat of the Romans under Crassus at Carrhae, could only be defeated by a king. This type is the first portrait Denarius of Julius Caesar, struck in the first half of January 44 BC. His title on this issue, Dictator Quartum, i.e. Dictator for the fourth time, was given before he received the title of Perpetual Dictator. The reverse features the goddess Juno Sospita, whose cult image was among the oldest in Rome, and the moneyer M. Metellus. Here's the last issue of Caesar's lifetime, issued just weeks before his assassination on the Ides of March in 44 BC. Now, Marcus Junius Brutus was a leader of the conspiracy against Caesar alongside Gaius Cassius Longinus. The reaction of the populace to Caesar's assassination on the Ides of March compelled Brutus and Cassius to flee Rome in April of 44 BC, a mere month after the assassination. The Senate's resolution to declare Brutus a public enemy on 28th November 44 BC was repealed in February 43 BC, and he was appointed governor of Crete, the Balkan provinces, and later Asia. Brutus went on to Macedonia and won the loyalty of its governor, Hortensius, raised an army, and seized the funds prepared by Caesar for his Parthian expedition. Successful against the Bessi in Thrace, they were a tribe of Thracians, he was hailed imperator by his troops, but after the establishment of the Second Triumvirate, which consisted of Mark Antony, Octavian, and Lepidus, in November of 43 BC, Brutus was again outlawed and joined forces with Cassius at Sardis in Asia Minor. So the coins continue with their story. Following the assassination of Julius Caesar, it was unclear who would inherit his legacy. Caesar's fellow consul and second in command, Mark Antony, assumed control of the Caesarian armies. Within days of the funeral, Antony proclaimed himself as Caesar's successor, first by surrounding himself with a bodyguard made up of Caesar's veterans, and then by compelling the Senate to transfer the provinces of Gallia Transalpina and Gallia Cisalpina to his control. These were the two provinces which Caesar had under his control in the last decade of his life. Octavian, Caesar's official heir, was not pleased. Octavian had been adopted as Caesar's son. He was by blood Caesar's grandnephew, but Caesar adopted him as his son, and Octavian adopted Caesar's name as his own. Cicero, who had initially been sympathetic to Caesar's murderers, joined with Antony and prevented the Senate from declaring Caesar a tyrant, thus preventing the conspirators from being granted amnesty for his murder. So Cicero's intervention basically prevented the Brutus and Cassius and the others from being given amnesty, because murdering a tyrant was considered a legal act, whereas just murdering Caesar for being Caesar was not. Cicero subsequently switched his stance again by denouncing Antony for his brutality in his handling of Rome, and made a series of speeches where he became Antony's enemy. Not a good idea, because Antony soon made peace with Octavian, forming the Second Triumvirate, and by doing so, sealed his own fate. Cicero was allowed to be killed by Octavian, and Antony's troops captured and then murdered Cicero, placing his hand and his head on the rostra at Rome. In the summer of 43 BC, following the Battle of Mutina, Octavian demanded from the Senate one of the consulships recently left vacant by the deaths of Hirtius and Pansa. When the Senate refused, Octavian marched to Rome with an army of 8 legions to organize consular elections. If you can't get the Senate to agree, bring your army and tell them to shut up. And that's what he did. The obverse legend demonstrates this issue was struck after Octavian became consul with his uncle, Hirtius, on 19th August, the first of 13 consulships which were to be held by Octavian, later known as Augustus. No doubt these coins were made as a payment to his military forces for their support. This issue marks the first appearance of the pairing of the portraits of Octavian with his adoptive father, Julius Caesar. This is meant to show that Octavian was the rightful heir of the slain dictator, as opposed to Antony's coinage, which paired his and Caesar's portraits in April of the same year. Now, here's the most famous coin of the period and one of the most famous of Roman coins altogether. It's the famous Eide MAR Denarius, issued by Marcus Junius Brutus as he gathered forces to fight against Mark Antony and Octavian. Interestingly, despite his stated veneration for the ideals of the Roman Republic, Brutus used his own portrait and celebrated his and Cassius's murder of Caesar. The Republic was truly dead when its own supporters no longer believed in its ideals. Coins such as this illustrate the ability of money to communicate historical and political messages to those who can read them. And here we have a breakdown of how to read and understand this coin from the Brutus for Marcus Junius Brutus, the moneyer L. Platorius Sestianus, name of the moneyer responsible, and the bust of Brutus himself, which appears on this coin in defiance of Roman Republican traditions. And then the title Imperator, Roman title for a victorious general, origin of the word emperor. And the daggers on the reverse famously represent Brutus and Cassius as primary actors in assassinating Caesar and therefore liberating the Roman people of the Roman Republic from his dictatorship, as represented by the pileus, the liberty cap, which is worn by freed slaves as a symbol of their liberty and became the symbol of liberty from tyranny of all kinds. And then the date, Aedibus Martis, Ides of March, March 15th, the date that Julius Caesar was murdered in 44 BC. So here's another coin of the Republicans. After fleeing Rome in 44 BC, Brutus and Cassius went their separate ways, but met again early in 42 BC at Smyrna in Ionia, which is in Asia Minor today, where they began preparations for the inevitable conflict between them and Mark Antony and Octavian. They began to create a power base in Asia by conquering cities for which this issue was undoubtedly struck. The title Imp on the reverse shows that Brutus still styled himself as the savior of the Republic, and victory is shown breaking the royal symbols of diadem and scepter as a clear allusion to their anticipated victory over the forces of tyranny represented by Mark Antony and Octavian. This very rare piece, this is one of 17 examples known of this Aureus, represents the period just before the climactic battle that Brutus and Cassius would fight against Antony and Octavian. The combined military and naval trophy on the reverse of this piece celebrates the military victories of Brutus in Lycia and Thrace, along with the naval victories of Cassius against the Rhodians, who were famous for their navy at the time. The tiny L on the reverse represents either Libertas or Lycia, but considering that the trophy commemorates Brutus's victory in Lycia, the latter interpretation seems more plausible. Publius Servilius Casca Longus, the moneyer, was the first assassin to plunge his dagger into Caesar on the Ides of March in 44 BC. In the summer of 42 BC, Brutus and Cassius marched through Macedonia and met the forces of Antony and Octavian just outside of Philippi, fighting two battles over the space of several weeks in October. After a draw in the initial engagement, in which Cassius committed suicide when he mistakenly thought that Brutus had been defeated, his own troops were defeated, but Brutus was able to snatch victory from the jaws of defeat, which meant that the battle ended up as a draw, basically. Brutus was then defeated and committed suicide during the second battle a couple of weeks later on the 23rd of October, 42 BC, using the dagger with which he had assassinated Caesar to commit his own suicide. This left the triumvirate in undisputed control of the Roman world. And here is one of the coins that celebrates this control by the two. This coin celebrates the union of Antony Octavian as partners in the Second Triumvirate during their 13-year joint domination of the Roman state. The third member of the Triumvirate was Marcus Aemilius Lepidus, who died in 13 or 12 BC, and was the last Pontifex Maximus before Octavian, after he became Augustus, appropriated the position for himself and his imperial heirs. For the rest of the imperial period, the Roman emperor would be the Pontifex Maximus of Rome, the chief priest. Lepidus, though an experienced general, was chosen for his high birth and because he was unwilling to challenge either Augustus or Antony, so neither one of them saw him as a serious rival. He was basically the go-between to encourage peace and communication between the two. Antony and Octavian divided the Roman world between themselves, with Octavian taking the west and Antony taking the east, basically from what is today Turkey and all the way down to Africa, whereas Octavian commanded Italy and the provinces of Macedonia and those areas to the west, including Gaul and Spain. This Denarius, struck in the eastern half of the empire, ruled by Antony, outlines the political situation in stark terms, with Antony and Octavian still sporting youthful long sideburns. One of the tactics that Octavian used was to always one of the tactics that Antony used was to display Octavian on his coins always as a youth, not really powerful and certainly not as important looking as Antony on the coins. While Antony occupies the dominant obverse, Octavian associates himself with the potent name of Julius Caesar. Gnaeus Domitius Ahenobarbus accompanied his father at Corfinium and Pharsalus on the side of Pompey during the civil wars. After his pardon by Julius Caesar, he retired to Rome in 46 BC, but after Caesar's assassination, Ahenobarbus decided to support Brutus and Cassius, and in 43 BC was condemned for complicity in the assassination of Caesar, which was untrue, but because of his joining with Brutus and Cassius and the other Republicans, Ahenobarbus was condemned to be killed whenever he was caught. So Ahenobarbus was successful in naval battles against the Second Triumvirate in the Ionian theater off of Greece, which is why this Denarius was struck. He eventually reconciled with Mark Antony, who made him governor of Bithynia, and he participated in Antony's campaign against the Parthians, becoming a consul in 32 BC. When war broke out between Antony and Octavian, Ahenobarbus, who initially supported Antony, but disgusted by Antony's relationship with Cleopatra, basically Antony had married Cleopatra, who was a foreign queen, and by doing so alienated much of the Roman elite, since he had been married to Octavian's sister, Octavia. So Ahenobarbus managed to change sides at the right time, joined with Octavian, and as a result, showing how judicious use of your loyalty can result in good things. He was married to Antonia Maior, the daughter of Mark Antony, and Octavia, their son, Gnaeus Domitius Ahenobarbus, married Agrippina Minor, the sister of the Emperor Caligula, and was the father of the Emperor Nero. Flexibility in choosing your side is an important skill during the civil wars, and eventually Ahenobarbus' family rose to the imperial purple as emperors. Back to our main story. Shortly after the Battle of Philippi in 42 BC, cracks began to appear in the Second Triumvirate. Antony's affair with Cleopatra, Queen of Egypt, and his designs on Rome's eastern holdings prompted Octavian to formulate a binding agreement that would buy buy him further time to build up his armies against Antony. At Brundisium, a pact was signed, bringing about a reconciliation and some semblance of peace. As a condition of this reconciliation, Antony was married to Octavian's widowed sister, Octavia. She stayed with him in Athens while he continued to prepare for war against Parthia. In 37 BC, Octavia helped negotiate the Pact of Tarentum, which renewed the triumvirate until 33 BC. Antony, however, had renewed his affair with Cleopatra. He remained in the east, where he married the queen and subsequently fathered several children. In 32 BC, as a renewal of the civil war became imminent, Antony divorced Octavia. The Battle of Actium, the naval battle of Actium, followed, resulting in the death of Antony and Cleopatra. In the aftermath of Antony's death, Octavia, known for her loyalty and nobility, brought Antony's surviving children to Rome to live with her. So she was a good Roman wife and stayed loyal to the memory of Antony and her children despite Antony's actions. Here's a coin that demonstrated what happened. These tetradrachms, struck after the separation of Antony and Octavia, heralds the political alliance and marriage of Antony and Cleopatra and their final break with Octavian, which eventually led to both of their deaths. During this time, Antony was moving throughout the Eastern Roman provinces as well as against Parthia. Cleopatra and Antony's political ambition had apparently been to create a new empire from the Eastern Roman provinces and the Ptolemaic kingdom in the east. This coin clearly shows the relationship of the two. Both of them are shown as rulers in their own right. Now, Octavian, now known as Augustus, after his defeat of all of his enemy, retains the outward forms of the republic. He learned from his adoptive father that it would be best to assuage the feelings of the elite and let them continue to hold power as Roman senators, acknowledging the superiority of the Roman Senate. But in the background, he was running the show. He was now the first man in Rome, the first among equals, but nothing happened without his permission and backing. He ensured proper veneration to the Republic and used his connections to Caesar to legitimize his rule. The idealized head on the reverse of this coin is the deified and rejuvenated Julius Caesar. The presence of a comet above the head is the Julian star, which appeared shortly after Caesar's death and was considered a symbol of Caesar's ascension to heaven as a god. And he was worshipped as a god at this point. So Augustus claims that as the son of Caesar, he is the son of a god, Augustus Divi Filius. And with that, we end our discussion. I hope you've learned something about how coins can be used to tell political stories once you understand how to read them. But anyway, at this point, we will take questions.
Hey there, Doug. Thank you so much. I've done something weird with there we go. If you have questions, if you can go ahead and put those in the Q&A at the bottom, and we can get Doug to answer. While I give that a few minutes, I do want to say thank you for joining us. You can go over to money.org and go to the events and learning tab, and then scroll down and there'll be online learning and you can see what all's coming up. We've got some really good stuff continuing to be scheduled. So I hope that you guys continue to check in and register and join us as we move through this NumismaTalks. So I don't see questions, Doug. Give it another second.
I don't see any questions at this point either.
Okay.
Yeah, please use the chat or the Q&A actually, if you have any. Otherwise, thanks for watching this. I hope it was interesting. I've always been fascinated by the coins, especially the EID MAR coin of this period. But it's interesting to figure out how many of the other coins that you can collect from this period do play a part in telling the story
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Doug. That was a great presentation. I love Roman history. So,
Thanks, Paula.
all right, everybody have a great day, and hopefully I'll see you back here in 2 weeks.
Bye-bye.